Just to kick off then, obviously welcome. This is Nulty's sort of first virtual roundtable that we've hosted. So thank you for agreeing to take part in it. It's kind of wonderful to see a very high caliber of people here. So, you know, thank you for donating your time as much as anything else. We've decided to run a series of virtual roundtables really to try and make sense of the COVID situation that we find ourselves in at the moment. And I think we all are probably going to agree that whatever happens, you know, the idea of the workplace is going to change once we start getting back to a new normal, whatever that is. So I hope that today really generates a really interesting debate amongst us as to what that future might look like. I will leave it at that. I will hand over to Theresa Dowling from FX Magazine, who has very kindly agreed to moderate today's debate. Obviously, Theresa has chaired countless roundtables, so we're in very capable hands, I think, Theresa. So over to you.
Okay, well, I'm intrigued with so many different perspectives around the table here. What do you all think about these offices, and what's it going to look like? And was this going to happen anyway, but maybe over 10 years, and it's just happened in 6 weeks? So and actually, if we don't know those people, are there some companies that will not go back to having an office and just save huge overheads?
Yes, I mean, we have done, I think that's an actually important point, Ben. We have done projects in the past which have no touch. No touch is going to get talked about probably a lot, but no touch environments exist. There are trading floors that already you can walk around where you don't touch things, like going to the loo. For me, what I'm seeing is, I think the overlay of health zones over layouts is actually the big change, and will be the design change. That in turn may or may not change densities, and densities will alter, but ultimately volumes matter. So I don't think you can change the volume, and density, whether you have more or less people in a building. What won't change is that the volume to be taken won't change. So I don't think necessarily we see less or more office space. We just see a different use of office space and how that works with a layer of health. And the reason health matters is because in the past we had a correlation between absenteeism and presenteeism, and what we have now is a clear causation for health being affected in an office. That in turn has a knock-on effect to wellness and well-being, and well-being still matters. But we have much better evidence for what is mental well-being within an office, health in an office, and it was an increasing layer of design anyway. So yes, I think we're going to run a bit faster. So those are my sort of key takeaways. You can then go down into lots of different layers of design thinking, but actually design still matters. People want to work in an office. There's a huge number of people at the moment, I think, working from home who are desperate not to work at home. And of course, they don't want to tell their employers that, because clearly their performance levels are down. And I think the big piece of evidence that nobody talks about is the entire country's performance level is down working from home. So clearly we do need offices. And that's a pretty easy fact. So the fact that you can do a study with a company and it's quite likely that people are going to tell you their performance isn't affected, because nobody wants to tell their employer that their performance is affected. That's a fairly straightforward one. I think, so on that note, I could hand over to someone else. Well, what do others think?
Productivity is reduced when people are working from home.
There's no direct evidence as yet, but there's some quite interesting evidence coming through this period about a reduction, I wouldn't say in productivity, but certainly a reduction in performance. And the measured productivity of the country, we do know, is enormously down. Clearly there are possibly, you could say there's some other factors, but it's the best experiment and evidence yet, that performance. So I think my personal view is, and it's a bit of a guess at this stage, but my personal view is that in the future, more people will work from home, but will be perhaps take an 80% pay cut on the days that they're working from home. But they will make that choice because actually people want the life-work balance. I mean, clearly there are savings by working from home that people don't have in terms of additional costs for going to an office. But younger people clearly do want to be in an office. I mean, my own company at the moment, we have employees working from home where the conditions are not great for them. And we need to think about those people. And that produces different types of mental stress. So we've been focusing on making sure that they're in their best mindset for working, that we can make sure that they can still enjoy certain things. And it's interesting that the government's leaked report on BuzzFeed at the moment doesn't really make huge reference to the office, makes reference to an awful lot of other spaces, but it hasn't made literally no real reference to offices. And I think they need more time to work out before coming back with an answer.
It's interesting because I think, from my perspective, personally, I find it much more straightforward working from home because there's less people, coming at you from all angles in the office. But also there's the lack of transport. You don't need to get on a train to go to work. You save time. But from a developer perspective, we are, things were hotting up not too long ago in terms of densities increasing and getting more people onto an office floor, only to find that all of a sudden we're now talking about the 2 metre rule. If it does pan out how it sort of seems like it's going to, and certainly as Theresa was saying, with the sort of 6 feet line around each desk, it's not great from our perspective, and we'll be looking less at office as a use if that's the case. So I'm very interested in how the industry and you guys, the designers, move forward, in a sort of innovative and an unusual path. So I'd be really interested to know what your ideas are in terms of, I mean, as Will says, the actual embedded within the workspace, but also within using different spaces, like for example, industrial spaces, where you have got that space and they're out of town, so you don't need to get on the train. You can drive on the motorway system to them. And where you can have that space around you. I mean, I'm not suggesting that's the answer, but it'd be interesting to know if there are examples like that in other countries or, emerging. So, that's my thoughts on it.
I think from my perspective, I've had a number of really interesting calls with senior execs, CEOs, and of big global organizations about all of this. And the thing that I've been summarizing it all in terms of my head is that at the moment, COVID has triggered the first ever global workplace survey in one moment in everyone's life, across every organization, across pretty much every country. So it's a very interesting thing. And I think for the first time, because it's such a wide impact, people are coming up with all sorts of views, and the experts are coming up with views, and the people are also coming up with their own views, and perhaps starting to already develop new habits and new routines. And from my perspective, from the top down, I think it's very easy to get perhaps locked in too much on the granular of what's going to happen in the actual physical workplace. I think the way I look at it in terms of trying to solve in my head where this is all going to end up and go is that really, I mean, for years I've been saying that it's crazy that everyone leaves home at the same time in the morning, crams onto the same train at exactly the same.
I agree. Yeah.
When everyone's doing a completely different job. Everyone's working a schedule that they have to work around, rather than a globalized, efficient time scale through a daily routine that works best for them, with the kids, the car, whatever. And so I think it's loosening up. Well, I really hope it's going to loosen up the 9 to 5 routine to start with. And it's interesting that there's some views about 80% salary for the 2 days that you work at home and so forth. And I think all of this is enabling us to really stop and think, and perhaps not be so much of a group of busy fools, because we're all victims of this 9 to 5. So I think it will be interesting to see what happens to people's routines. nature's having a massive word with us. I mean, if the waters of Venice are going clear within 7 days of all of the cruise ships
Yeah.
waters, and if the pollution rates are globally disappeared, nature's having a big word. And I think the first thing I've said to everybody is, don't rush, don't set out new rules too quickly. Let's stop, think and learn from this and reflect on it and slowly build up a response to it. But for sure, I mean, I was talking with Craig, who's the property director for British Telecom, who's just finished a consolidation program of all of their estates to squeeze people into buildings. And of course, now he's probably having to reverse that. So there's a lot of classics going on. And there's a lot of classics with things like toilet doors. I've been putting no-touch automatic electric doors into a project for the last couple of years. The client has been banging on at me, telling me how I'm wasting his money because of this blasted electric door that will probably break down. And now he's patting me on the back for pushing it forward. So
I bet he is. That's
Life as a designer.
stop and think. That's my first advice, I think, with it.
I think the big thing is choice, because when we're recruiting the younger ones into the teams, you know, it's a big thing that they want to work from home. They want to know that we're an organisation that gives them flexibility, that there isn't that presenteeism there. So historically, the younger ones, particularly in the team, have been wanting choice. With this enforced lockdown and with this enforced working from home, you're taking choice away and you're making people work from home. And so the surveys that are coming out of Cushman's are that the younger people are the ones that are actually saying we want to get back to the office quicker, much quicker. And the older generation of the older workforce are actually, they've probably got older children. They've probably got quite a nice setup, maybe not, you know, essentially in London, you know, their circumstances are very different to the younger generation. And they're sitting there going, this is great. You know, we're a part-time mechanic, part-time this, you know, whatever it may be. And it's the younger ones that are really struggling from a mental health point of view. So, you know, and they're desperate to get back to the office.
The younger team members on our team as well have said they've actually begun to notice that their learning has slowed down, because the learning that they would get just from being in the physical office space and being around others and overhearing how things are dealt with, or just, you know, as others, the more senior members of the team, you know, strategic discussions on how do they solve problems. They're not learning from those discussions and overhearing anymore, because all of the interactions that we currently have are very deliberate conversations, or they're very deliberate meetings where people need to take their turn to speak. And perhaps there isn't as much free time, if you like, to have those types of learning discussions. So not only from the social aspect, as you say, but actually the speed at which they can feel themselves learning, they've also seen that now as a bit of a hindrance, which they've never foreseen before.
I don't think flexible working or remote working will be considered inferior to being in the office, and so shouldn't be subject to a reduced salary. And I think Theresa's right, this was happening anyway, it's just going to be massively accelerated. But if this had happened 5 years ago, I dread to think how many of these companies would be trying to operate, because it just wouldn't have been technically possible. So the last 5 years that everything's migrated to the cloud and has meant, to be honest, it's relatively simple. If users have their own devices or laptops, then most systems are now functioning. But it's certainly going to be giving staff choice, and I don't think people will be pushed back to come back into the office in a hurry.
How people do in the office compared to when they're working at home. And it's roughly speaking about the same. People tend to prefer a routine at home. They would maybe start early, finish late, have breaks in the middle of the day, and they might get distracted by what's on telly, for example, by some biscuits in the cupboard or whatever it happens to be when you get distracted at home. But they tend to make up for it. But Roxanne, you're absolutely right. The office will be needed because it's a resource. You know, all this stuff that we're doing now, this Zooming, is great, but it's not a substitute for face-to-face communication. It's just an alternative to it. So what will be important as we move forward is probably a recognition for lots of companies and lots of people that working from home does work and that they can do it and facilitate it, but also that the office is an entity, which, let's face it, we've had since the ancient Egyptians invented the office. will still be necessary, will still be something for us to go to.
And when I can't remember his name, but the nice chap who invented the telephone, back in the age, he was heavily criticised for creating the telephone because it would stop people from talking to one another.
Yes, that's true. Yeah.
And actually, the opposite happened. And same with Teams calls. I mean, if I personally see the Microsoft Teams advert on television one more time, I'm going to self-implode. But I've lived life on Teams and Zoom and Skype and stuff, and I'm slightly bored with missing a man hug, arms round shoulders, that type of stereotypical contact that you have with people that you work closely with. But the fact is that the office or a building, a space to come together as people, I think is actually going to be magnified after this, because people are missing one another, and the value of person-to-person contact, I think, has gone back to the basics a little bit. And so it's what the space is that we give to them is my big question mark at the moment. And I love the thing, Theresa, about the bit of carpet, the 6-foot circle bit of carpet. I think that's a stereotypical Chinese reaction. Is
I think to add to that, I think question from Theresa was about, can companies save overheads? We house companies from sort of 2 to thousands of employees. And what is quite clear is probably those that are 3, 5s, the 10s, they can very well manage working from home for an extended period of time. But once you sort of breach that kind of 20, 25 member company, it becomes quite difficult to actually being able to sort of form that team, that community when people are working remotely. And I think what we're being asked about densities and how do we design for densities. In our spaces, a client can take a density, whether it's, 1 per 100 square meter, 1 per 30 square meter, whatever they want, they sort of choose how they want to sit. But I think the key element to consider before we go into spending that valuable capex and square footage on, putting walls and separators and one-way walking systems is a transportation system. Because when you spend every morning commute in and out, standing 3 centimeters away from one another, it doesn't really matter what you do in the office. And I think that's really, really important. I think that the point where where we have a choice maybe of people working in teams A and B, maybe at least while we coming out of this sort of COVID post-recovery, where there is a natural sort of social distancing because there is less people in the office and people work half from home, half from the office. I think we're also seeing actually increased demand for our more out of kind of core central zone 1 locations, those that are closer to people's homes, that they can just walk from their home to that place, and they still need that environment where you can focus, because it's I'm sure Craig will confirm the sort of that psychological need of changing of your space to be able to to have 2 separate functions when your kids are shouting around the corner and something else happens. There is absolutely no way for you to concentrate. But I think it's certainly what it shows us is it seems like, at least from where I can see, people still keep being relatively productive and relatively able to get on with their sort of day-to-day workload, to solve issues, to hold meetings, to sort of progress work through that distance working. So I think what we've just maybe sort of accelerated is that comfort, that it's actually totally okay. You can be very productive being at home and you don't need to be physically in the space. And coming back to well-being and the buildings, I think, again, it's just accelerated that requirement. If before occupies only those that probably were kind of at the very, very much a pioneering thought process of, I care for my employees, I really want them to feel well, I know it affects productivity and it affects, my bottom line, would be thinking about healthy buildings. I think now, hopefully, it kind of accelerated that thought further with more employers actually understanding that that's a very, very crucial part of their P&L and of their business, and actually going for buildings that have the, whether it's WELL certifications, whether it's, any other accreditations that sort of support that well-being at work system, I think only will hopefully increase after COVID.
I think the thing that we're all questioning is, what is the office actually for? So what makes us want to go back? Because I think many people are enjoying this period at home, but equally many people have the desire to be in the space where community happens. And it's so interesting. I mean, one part of it is that I think we found this new sort of digital world where we've got our digital community. And sometimes I think I felt closer to teams having meetings into each other's homes and care for people's well-being, whereas in the sort of normal rush of things, you might not even stop to ask somebody, well, how are you today? So I think it's quite odd, because I think if people are craving community and to get back to work soon, I think actually going back to work is going to be a bit of a disappointment, because I think we will be in this distancing mode, and we are going to struggle to have those large events that we crave. We're going to find it difficult to host big meetings, so they'll probably still continue online. And then you're going to have this sort of shift patterns, or different people coming in at different times. So how do you kind of bring your whole business back together and have community?
Could it be about prioritizing? Prioritizing which of those events you do, and how many people that come to them, and they might make them a little bit more kind of concentrated,
more intimate, maybe.
More intimate, yeah.
Yeah.
I think I completely agree with you that we all need it. So when we finally can go back to work, we're all going to be very keen on it. But it's about the patterns that Lee was mentioning, changing those patterns and making it possible to go to work, to open all those doors and do all those things that we do without passing on things like the virus. And I guess potentially Ollie might have some ideas about how all that automation might happen, and the sort of intelligent processes that might come into play.
Absolutely.
Physically.
There's a sort of more basic level, and I guess systems that can be implemented a bit more simply by clients that don't currently have them. There's the sort of resource booking systems, desk booking, meeting room booking systems, workplace apps so that people can be tracked. And then, for buildings that are smart capable, and it's only really starting to come through as the norm, then you really are able to do many more things, whether that's control the flow through access gates, whether it's lock off doors when a limit of people in the building or an area has been reached, whether it's informing the cleaning routine of areas of the building that are being used heavily and therefore you need to increase the frequency of the clean. Analytics, there's all sorts.
That's my point about the 9 to 5, and it's not about what a desk is, what a spacing between people is. This is probably the only opportunity that the human race is ever going to have in this modern world to regroup. And I think the power, what I'm seeing from the senior executives, is that they are actually, for the first time, rather than necessarily listening to a change management consultant about how they change their working environment, they're actually listening to everybody that's telling them how they want to restart work, come back to the office, live a new routine. And it's such an opportunity for all of us as experts, property owners, investors, developers, consultants. It's such an important opportunity for all of us to help a new, healthier, freer way of life that isn't cramming onto that train. It's more efficient for each individual. So rather than us working around a schedule, which is a habitual habit, we shouldn't do that anymore. And I totally agree. I would be very disappointed if we all went back to normal. I would be hugely disappointed about that. And I think our role in this at the moment is crucial, because we do have the ability to help to change the direction of all of this. And I mean, I've got lots of emails from people that are asking them what to do from companies, and I'm being really brutal about telling them that we've got to change things.
But has this sort of coincided, Lee, with trust from your clients and employers that there is no longer a visible culture, that you have to be there, because it's now proved with 6 weeks that everyone's got the tools they need to work from home, which wouldn't have happened a few years ago when there was still people, visible working hours. And it's always thought that you were skiving or watching daytime telly if you weren't in the office. And there could be a bit of sort of gang culture, it's suggesting that, you're not there at a boardroom meeting or something, so everyone can turn on you like that. And I know for myself, I haven't had a desk in the office or a terminal in the office for about 7 years now, and I've been at FX for 14. But it means I miss what Lee was saying, the face-to-face meetings. So I still have maybe 15 meetings a week, usually between, 9 and 5, I suppose. But I do all my serious work early in the morning or late at night. Now, they're all external meetings. They're rarely internal ones. So I've got a bit of an anathema about offices, but that probably says more about me.
I think Theresa, your point's sort of well-meaning in that I think what it really produces is a real focus on a live-work balance and the importance of both office and home and how they work together. And I think that's what goes to the point about what CEOs are perhaps recognising more, that both matter, and they really matter. Coming to the office for a culture really matters. That connection of people in an office isn't going to go away. You're going to need an office space that brings people together, even as a sort of subset to the density question or the health layer question about how that works. So I think all this has done in that sense has accelerated the balance and the ability for offices and groups of people to train each other as to what fits for them in terms of their own individual culture and the overall cohorts within businesses. I think talking about cohorts is a better way to think about maybe adjacencies or departments. But who really works together in the larger organizations is one of the bigger, more developing questions through this period of time, because that's what people are really discovering right now is, it's not really all of those people that we thought in those departments integrating. It's actually that set of people operate, and we can see that from the calls they're doing. And it's sort of creating, what we're observing is a whole raft of other layers about how people integrate and work, and that it works in the right way. What happens as a return to work will still be fascinating, but I don't think it's actually going to, personally, I don't think it's going to change densities at all. Or say volumes, actually. Densities will change, but volume of space won't change, because you're still going to need volumes of spaces for well-being reasons, health reasons, other layered reasons that always existed. So I don't think those change. I think repurposing where places are, industrial units will become quite interesting. Whether we all need to have large city offices will become quite interesting. So I think the how offices impact how cities work will be quite an interesting subject. I think for the first time you see the real connection between perhaps master planning and workplace, and why it matters because of its connection to home. And in that sense, we're sort of reliving a whole architectural period that perhaps we're more familiar in the UK with the 1960s and garden cities. There are a lot of reimagining those times.
I've been saying for 2 or 3 years now, with all of the projects that we do in workplace, in hotels, hospitality, all the different sectors that we're asked to go and sort of turn upside down and shake up a bit and change. I've been talking for a long time about how buildings are slowly becoming slightly decategorized. So, you've got this classic of, your co-work space is becoming more like home. Your offices, for a long time, people have been using the slang language that it's a home from home, but actually, really, they've still been designing a normal office. And so, there's a bit of there's a bit of focusing here with what's happening to actually force people to really change things. But I've been banging on a lot about how buildings are decategorizing. And I think this is going to start to really perhaps reframe, decategorize what the office is. Yes, the space still needs to be there. Yes, there's the community on Teams, which I think has been a fabulous new layer that we've all discovered. And it definitely, by talking to people sat at home, you do connect in a different way. I love all of that. It's daft that people email one another when they're sat 3 meters away, when they're sat in the same building. So it's kind of breaking that up a bit. But the whole idea of metropolis, so that buildings are more multifunctional, and it's perhaps a larger building, but it earns its income through rentals in a different way. I mean, on a very small scale, one of the new hotel brands that we're creating at the moment, there's no hotel reception, there's no hotel lobby, there's actually a pizza shop, which is the reception, and that pizza shop earns rents for the property investor, whereas the normal lobby space would be dead space in terms of rental income. But
that's fantastic.
At the same time, it's creating a great experience for the user. So I think there's going to be and this is my stop and think thing, is that there's a lot of power in stopping and thinking about this for, Ben, from your perspective as an investor as well, to actually reset how buildings earn their money, and and how the institutions allow developers to be freer, with decategorizing what hedge funds and investment funds are designed to fund. And so I can't underestimate the power of how this is. It should change things.
I love that positivity. I completely agree. I'm like I said earlier, very excited about what could come out of this. That being one, what you just talked about is a great idea. But knowing what Will does, and having worked with him in the past, the kind of the workflow and this whole kind of, being concerned about the density and how that's going to work going forward. I totally agree. There's all these positives, but how I find it interesting, Will, that you say that density may not have to change in order to deal with this. I can't quite see, apart from the shift patterns and as Lee was saying, transport timings and things like that changing. How would density be able to continue as it is, with WeWork kind of setups and things like that?
Yeah, well, I think first of all, Ben, what I mean by that is that volume won't change. So you might have an office space of 50,000 square foot or 5,000 square meters, but it may or may not have more workplaces or less workplaces, or more people or less people. What will happen is that volume stays the same, but how we think about it and how we design to it changes according to a recalibration, let's say, of a live, life, work balance. And in that sense, I think Lee's probably right. Change managers, workplace strategy has to be rethought. Design has to be rethought and reconsidered. And even in the sense that those spaces may not even be 50,000 square foot spaces. Or almost to Theresa's point, it actually is a collection of 1,000 square foot spaces, meaning you've got a whole mass of people. You could just put, where are those spaces going? You can extrapolate it to that range. I mean, there's no reason why you wouldn't get a connection of electric cars sat around the M25, all going to perhaps you get the rise of the business park. I mean, horrific thought, but perhaps that happens. But it's just reimagined in a slightly different way, and I think that's probably what we're dealing with is a change, a real step change in design thinking and what we do in the future. I mean, it'll start off with things like Amy's 6-foot office. You sort of see some of that beginning to happen, which is a reaction to a necessity perhaps in the next 12 to 24 months. But long term, those things have impact, and it comes back to, why do you even want to go to an office? You want to go to an office because it's a culture. But Craig's point about the Egyptians creating the first office, what's that about? It's about culture. It's about reasons. Why does it actually exist? So I think culture, well-being, health all matter.
I think there's two things. One, measuring productivity under these conditions is not really reflection on how productive people would be working from home normally, because you've got the distraction of the kids and all the rest of it. But I think a lot of corporates are about staff kind of just winging it, going out and downloading Zoom and just going off policy. We're getting that feedback from our clients. IT directors are tearing their hair out. And yeah, I think there's going to be this sea shift change in working from home and the choice staff are given, but there will have to be some investment on security, because there's going to be some pretty embarrassing security fails with this sort of size of change in working practice. So it'll be quite interesting.
If I may, just going back to how this started with Theresa, there is, and there will continue to be, a really big dichotomy in the workplace about people like us, the people that can work from Costa or will go to these really nice office spaces, and the other sort of 70% of people who are very, very heavily monitored in their workspace, in their very crowded workspace at the moment. And one of the main issues we face, and Theresa, you alluded to it in your question, is that technology is a great enabler, but it's also a great handicapper. And the people that are monitored in their workplaces can now be monitored at home. You've only got to see the Isle of Wight apps going around at the moment to realize we can track where people are, what they're doing, and when they're doing it. So whilst, again, the likes of us can have a really good ambrosia tasting workplace, there is a great risk that an awful lot of people will extend the dystopian workplace from where they are at the moment or where they were before COVID to their home space. And that's a real danger that we need to address, I think.
I'm interested to know how businesses respond, because I think we're going to move away from the hierarchical businesses we've seen. And I think if you see new business models, that ultimately where people are going to be more democratic and paying more attention to the needs of staff, ultimately that will create different environments in itself. This idea that we start to ask people what is going to work for them. For example, we're asking all our staff, how's it working for you? You know, looking at that, trying to get a good idea, and knowing that this is a difficult period too. It's not the best time to be doing the analytics.
I saw a study from I can't remember the professor's name, but a professor from Cambridge University in financial modelling and so forth, and his outtake was that there's a window here where businesses can really create a worse picture out of this on the interests of driving performance targets and revenue. But on a sort of psychological level or on a business investment level, his conclusion and summary was that the businesses, the bosses, the individuals that take the correct moral stance with this, having experienced COVID, are the businesses that are going to absolutely thrive and succeed long term with it. Because and this goes back to my original point, that it's this, for the first time ever, everybody at the same time is now able to vote with their feet in terms of as being an employee, and that's where the big reset button, I think, is gonna kick in. And I think, slowly businesses that try to take advantage of this situation are the businesses that are slowly going to strangle themselves.
Would you say, and this is open to everyone, are there some sectors that will not be needing an office? So if some sectors, come back and all right, there's flexible working, but in answer to the questions of office space will still be required and the volume will be the same, won't there be some sectors that, now they've tried it, do not want to go back to an office? Or another way, would there be some sectors, who definitely champion at the bit and can't wait to go back to office space?
I think where the biggest surprise will be the financial sector, because a lot of the other sectors that I've worked with and we work with, they've all most people have taken up an element of agile working, an element of other work settings within the office, collaboration space. You know, I don't want to, like, hoteling, those kind of things. But the financial sector, particularly the trading desk, I've got 2 clients that I've been working with at the moment that categorically the feedback over the last few years has been traders cannot work remotely, traders cannot work from home. We have to be in the desk. When everyone needs a desk, they need 6 screens. They're not moving from one desk to one person. And they have absolutely been forced to work from home. And you know what, they're working, you know, they're working well. And so
some traders are actually still working in the trading floors.
Yes,
but
yeah.
I think we've got to be a bit careful about how we place that, because you know, there are very active trading floors right now, and but your point's not lost, is there are elements on a trading floor of people who have been able to work from home, but
yes,
you know, they are seen as key workers because you've got to at least keep some form of economy running. So they have been allowed to go to the trading floors. And
I'm talking about, you know, there's various different elements within the financial organisation, not just the trader, you know, where they have been saying, we need this space. And now the real estate and the workplace people that I'm speaking to in those sectors are quite excited. You know, they've had their 40,000, 50,000 square foot requirement put on hold because they don't know what requirement they're going to need at the end of this.
Yeah, and actually it's a very good point too that you made with it being unthinkable that traders could work remotely. So for such a traditional industry, and as you say, 6 screens and, you know, complicated IT, I dare say, but wow, what an overturn that people are successfully working remotely.
Yeah.
So that is quite shocking, really. Yeah, but in a good way. In a good way. It just
definitely.
It's all positive.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's all positive in the long run, but we will definitely need office space for you know, for certain aspects of all the across the board, really. I mean, it's interesting, Theresa, you were saying, is there a sector or an aspect of any industry where they won't need to? And I personally think, you know, they'll need that moment where you go to Costa Coffee, you know, to be centralised in most cases. So people will have to come together, and you know, whether the densities change or not, it's the actual physical. I can't remember who was saying it. I think Craig. The actual need to have physical, you know, to be in the same place at the same time, as well as all this other great stuff we've now realised is possible. I definitely think it's important that we, you know, realise that we all need to come together too.
Do you think we're going to see a greater shift towards, you know, better amenity space then? So, you know, perhaps floor plates, you know, sort of working floor plates squeezing, but, you know, more coffee space. I mean, it's what we've seen. Lee mentioned kind of hotels earlier. Over the last few years, we've been seeing, you know, guest rooms in hotels getting smaller and smaller and smaller, but the amenity space in hotels getting bigger and being multi-use. Do you think the same is going to happen in the workplace then?
I think it's going to be really interesting what senior management decide to do with their space. And by senior management, I mean, what strategic direction do you want to take your business? Because I think for some businesses that are perhaps quite mature and maybe their offering might be quite limited, if you want to call it that, or very specific and very specialized, they could probably have more success potentially working in spaces which are quite different from the traditional spaces that we've had. But going forward, where you have the bigger the organization, you know, the ones that are greater than that 20 to 25 size organization, where they're trying to perhaps diversify, or where they are trying to get their teams to diversify and have the diversity of thought perhaps. In order for those interactions to happen, they're going to need to be very specific and very directional in terms of how they make those interactions happen. And they might be in that cafe sort of space where the sort of free thought and maybe a bit more relaxed conversation happens, or in terms of the adjacencies of the types of spaces, because you may not come to work from 9 to 5 to do that task. It won't necessarily be task-oriented work. You may then have to come to work to sort of collaborate and to spark new ideas, or to even have a thought about, okay, well, I've reached this layer or level in my career, where should I move to next? Because if you don't have those sort of casual or by chance conversations or interactions, you may not ever get to see what is the art of the possible and what might be different. Because right now, every interaction that I'm having with my team, and potentially you yourselves, is very deliberate. You're having a conversation for a specific purpose and a specific task. And if you are having that free thought conversation, it's still very limited because it's sort of one-on-one. It's not necessarily with 10 people to have, you know, just the free thought. So I think it's going to fall perhaps to the people who are setting the strategic direction of a business to decide very deliberately how those spaces are going to be used, and then how the design could react and facilitate those deliberate moves, I think.
Because we've been designing the offices and building offices to enhance that chance collision. You know, where are we going to put the interconnecting stairs? Where are we going to put the tea point? Where are we going to put this cafe area to try and increase that chance collision? So you bump into people, you spark off thought and, you know, ideas. And so there might be the traditional workstation setting is reduced, but definitely, and if people are just coming to the office for that social interaction, for that meeting, for that workshop, but then they'll do all their actual quiet working at home. And like, you know, Will said at the beginning, you might only be coming in 2 or 3 days a week.
I do fear a little for the creative industries because Will, Lee, Linzi, you know, creativity, in my opinion, comes from interaction. It comes from collaboration. I want to see and touch those samples, you know. It's very hard doing that whilst you're working from home, and even social distancing, that's going to be difficult. So
definitely miss going around an art gallery.
Yeah, me too.
I do wonder if we'll see some clustering of creative types, or more clustering. I heard of an architect firm who are going to give up their offices, and when they need a meeting, they're just going to go to a co-working space. Wow. So you know, and I was thinking, well, that is interesting, but also thinking, well, you know, maybe larger businesses, bigger businesses in the creative world might sort of host spaces for other smaller creatives. So you get, I mean, I know that's happening already, but maybe that will come more to the fore. You know, so these bigger businesses purposefully take more space because they're going to sublet to these smaller businesses. So you're getting much more kind of interaction in the mix.
I think that's absolutely right. I think the specification of co-working spaces that work to certainly types of industry, whether that's the creative industries or other parts of industry, will definitely happen. I mean, co-working spaces at the moment are incredibly generic and don't necessarily work for all types of businesses. And I think there'll be different hubs where people can go, and that will shift. I mean, it'll be fascinating watching what happens there, because you know there are big shifts in how people are thinking around that, and I don't know the answer either. It's difficult to know exactly how that plays out.
Presumably the co-working model is going to really not work in this interim period where it's all based on having the numbers of people in a building. If they're going to have to socially distance, I don't see how their business model is going to stack up. Post-COVID, I think
Ollie,
there will be an increased demand.
We have a co-working expert amongst us.
I guess that comes to the definition of co-working. I think the true co-working, as we sort of all think of it, where you know it's a big room and loads of people in it, all sitting next to each other, sort of a large coffee shop area. It doesn't work. It hasn't worked for a long time. It has never really made any money, and has you know been dying out quite rapidly. Though I think what we probably are talking about more here is that flexible office kind of space, really. And the reality, and the WeWork was mentioned with the densities, etc. The reality of it is, you know, obviously there is a kind of a prescribed number of people per square foot, or per, you know, desks per square foot. the model has been shifting, and we have been particularly shifting away from sort of, here's the room, you can occupy it as a 20. In reality, clients can occupy a massive room as 1, as 5, as 10, as 20, whatever it is that they like. And they are very much led by their own needs. Most of our buildings, that we design to maximum occupancy, which is a lot higher than sort of a traditional occupied offices, end up actually being occupied very, very similar to a traditional office space, in addition to all the kind of breakout areas that we also provide. So, a space that is potentially, can accommodate 150 people is being occupied by 30 or 40 in our spaces, because they want their own meeting rooms, they want their own breakout space, they want their own sort of community within the kind of the building. And then they rely on extended services and extended facilities that we provide within the buildings. So I think it really will depend on the sort of the operator in question, how they really sort of cater for the offering out there. I think the sort of the conversation about whether this model is going to work with the required increased social distancing, in essence, if that's the case, it means that the companies either have to halve their employees or double the size of their space. It's very unlikely that they're going to come to a co-working provider or any landlord and say, well, can I please have 2 times the space for the same amount of money? So inevitably, they will have to pay for it. It's pretty black and white, and commercially it will not stack up. So I think there's a lot of sort of conversations that are happening, but I think the truth of it is we are creatures of habit. We'll come back to the office. We'll keep from each other probably 2 meters apart. A week after it's going to be 1.5 meters, and week after that it's probably going to be back to sort of a normal distancing when we feel that it's safe enough to do so. So it's answering question in terms of pure co-working, it's not really a viable model as we know it. It doesn't work. Flexible office space, a lot argue that it's actually a lot better managed centrally, because we have, we're a lot more service-led in terms of cleaning, in terms of initiatives, hand sanitizing, being able to control people on entry, on exit, thermal imaging, various different things that can be implemented centrally and around centrally. That a facilities management company is just not, frankly, most of the time fitted out to be able to provide that level of service. Ability to control air conditioning, and some say depending on kind of rating of your fit out and the cleanliness of your air. So there's a lot of advantages, I think, with that specific model. And being very optimistic, regardless of what we're seeing currently, being very optimistic on a lot of businesses that actually will maybe direct away from the kind of traditional model towards the flexible model for various different reasons. And economic uncertainty always helps with that, because people don't want to get stuck for 5, 10, 15, 20 years, which is I think average lease length in London is something like 6 years with a break option at 3. So that's reducing drastically, and I think we'll only see probably more of that.
Just to come out some really good points there. One thing that in all the work that we've done that we find is really, really important, and this feeds into the initial point as well about the collective herd instinct, if you like, of creative people, is that we need to listen to what people want. And in the long run, this is just a spit, and everybody's absolutely right. We have to have the social distancing. But as we move forward, for example, the architecture of a theocracy, the approach of like Libeskind and Bell-Hearn of this world, is always beatable by simply asking the people what they want. And so as they move now from home space into office space, and the other way around, as they increase what they're doing at home, if we ask them what they want and we incorporate what is the genius of design, because as designers you have some fabulous ideas, you incorporate that into what people want rather than necessarily leading that horse forward, you ride it. The results are fantastic. We are getting increases in well-being, we're getting increases in productivity, we're even getting increases in intelligence when we do that, when we incorporate design into that kind of approach. So I think I have a chance to do that now. And this room is fabulous and can do that.
I couldn't agree more with that, and I think that's the whole opportunity that all of us have got to seize, because as workplace experts, designers, come on, as an industry, where 1 minute we're talking about how open plan is the best thing since sliced bread, and then 10 years later we're saying the complete opposite, and then another 10 years later saying reverse again. And I think there's a problem there with that cycle. And
it's just design iteration, isn't it, Lee?
Well, I don't know, but I mean, I'd hate to see us all come up with the next fad, and without stopping and thinking. And with hotels, when we launched a prototype of a new hotel for Joe and Joe on a surf camp in Biarritz, we literally sat ourselves down as designers and thought about what people want. And they didn't want a hotel anymore. They wanted something different. And the thing that opened my world with that across all sectors is that we designed it for a budget kind of target for the millennial kind of age group, but actually we found, because it was so doing the reverse of people having to work around buildings, it was actually buildings working around people, which is not easy to do, but it's doable. And we found that a little hotel was a proof of concept that only had 135 beds, and that's not bedrooms, that's just beds, was having garden parties of nearly 4,000 people. And it was granny, granddad, great grandpa, kids. It was the whole family going to parties like that. So I'm completely passionate about how the what we deliver next as a group of experts works around the people, their routines, what makes them efficient machines as people. And when we did the program for Jaguar Land Rover globally, the first thing I said to Sir Ralph at the time is that he was saying to me, look, Lee, I want you to deliver me a workplace strategy globally that changed people to their desks. And I said, well, I'm the wrong person for you, Ralph. And I said, what you need to look at is look at outside of the office and outside of the business and design people's lives, and then your efficiency will come. And he resisted that for 18 months until his daughter got a new job and explained to him that by going rowing every morning, early in the morning, it changed her world and her life. And that's the sort of the top-down approach we have to take with this.
I'm pleased you mentioned, Lee, that some clients are not progressive, I suppose, in their thinking. And so as much as we were saying earlier, it's listen to the people, which of course is essential, but then, maybe they need to be challenged a bit more to move forward. Because no one really likes change, but if we're saying that this can be seen as an opportunity for absolutely changing the way we live in the office, and if creativity comes from problem solving, well, isn't this the most creative challenge that you would ever have come across?
This needs a proper piece of genius as a game changer to really reboot this big time.
What an amazing conversation that was. Thank you to everybody for giving up their time, and have a wonderful day.